In July 1945, an American warship completed the most important secret mission of the entire war. She carried the weapon that would end the fighting in the Pacific and save hundreds of thousands of lives. She did her job perfectly, and then the United States Navy forgot she existed. 4 days later, nearly 900 men were still in the water, and nobody had even noticed the ship was gone. This is the story of USS Indianapolis. To understand what happened to Indianapolis, you need to understand what kind of ship she was. She was not just any cruiser. She was one of the most decorated ships in the American fleet, with 10 battle stars to her name. She had been the personal flagship of Admiral Chester Nimitz, the man who commanded the entire Pacific War. She had survived a kamikaze attack that would have killed a lesser ship, been repaired, and gone straight back into the fight. Her crew of nearly 1,200 men were experienced sailors who had been through everything the Pacific could throw at them. By the summer of 1945, with the war winding down and Japan running out of options, they might have been forgiven for thinking the worst was behind them. They were wrong. The worst was still ahead, and it would not come from the enemy. In mid-July 1945, Indianapolis received orders unlike anything her captain, Charles McVay, had ever seen. The cargo was loaded at night, in secret, by a team of men who answered to nobody on the ship. Nobody was told what it was. 2 large metal cylinders were lifted aboard and bolted directly to the deck. Whatever was inside them was too important and too fragile to be stored below. What Indianapolis was carrying were components for the atomic bomb. The uranium core that would eventually destroy the city of Hiroshima was sitting on her deck, and almost nobody aboard knew it. She was ordered to get the cargo to the island of Tinian as fast as possible, and to tell no one where she was going or why. She crossed the Pacific in 10 days, faster than almost any ship of her size had ever managed. She arrived at Tinian, unloaded the cargo, and sailed away. The mission was a complete success. 12 days later, the bomb fell on Hiroshima, and the war moved toward its end. Indianapolis had done everything asked of her. Now she was no longer needed for anything urgent. She was ordered to the Philippines for training exercises, sailing alone, without an escort, through open ocean. And that is where everything went wrong. Just after midnight on the 30th of July 1945, a Japanese submarine surfaced briefly in the dark Pacific and found Indianapolis sailing alone on a moonless night. The submarine's commander, Mochitsura Hashimoto, could hardly believe his luck. A large American cruiser, no escort, no zigzag course, sailing in a straight line. He fired 6 torpedoes and waited. 2 of them hit. The first torpedo blew the bow off the front of the ship. The second struck amidships, near the powder magazine, and the resulting explosion ripped through the ship from below. Every light on the ship went out. Power was gone. The radio room was destroyed before a proper distress signal could be sent. The ship had no bow. She was taking on water faster than anything could stop it. Indianapolis was already dying before most of her crew even woke up. From the moment the torpedoes hit, to the moment Indianapolis rolled over and sank, 12 minutes passed. 12 minutes is not long enough to think clearly, to organize, or to say goodbye. Men who had been asleep in their bunks grabbed whatever they could find and jumped into the black Pacific water. Some without life jackets, some without shoes, some without any idea which direction was up. The ship took around 300 men down with her. That left approximately 900 men in the water, in the dark, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no rescue on the way. They did not know that yet. Most of them assumed help would arrive within hours. The Navy would know they were missing. Ships would come. It was simply a matter of staying alive until morning. None of them knew that the Navy had no idea they were gone. This is the part of the Indianapolis story that is hardest to understand, and it is the part that made an already terrible disaster into something much worse. When Indianapolis failed to arrive at the Philippines as scheduled, nobody raised an alarm. The officer responsible for logging arrivals had been told by a superior not to bother reporting ships that failed to show up, to avoid unnecessary paperwork. Indianapolis was listed as overdue, and nothing more. The distress signal that had been sent as the ship went down was received by 3 separate stations. One officer was drunk, one decided it was a Japanese trick, one was ordered by his superior not to wake anyone up with unconfirmed reports. The most important warship the Americans had sent to sea that summer was sinking. 900 men were going into the water, and at every single point where someone could have acted, someone chose not to. For 4 days no rescue came. The men were on their own. The first day was survivable. The men floated in their life jackets, grouped together, burned by the sun, drinking nothing because there was almost no fresh water. The ocean was warm enough not to kill them with cold. Then the sharks came. Oceanic white-tip sharks, drawn by the blood and sound of nearly 1,000 men splashing in the water. They came from below, taking men from the edges of the groups, then from deeper in, men who had survived the sinking, who had done nothing wrong, who were simply waiting for help that was not coming, were taken one by one. Survivors described hearing screams in the dark from men they could not see and could not help. Some men lost their minds from thirst, drinking seawater and becoming delirious, seeing things that were not there. Some gave up. Some fought for 4 full days and nights. By the time rescue arrived, the 900 men who had entered the water had become a fraction of that number. On the morning of the 2nd of August, a Navy patrol aircraft on a routine anti-submarine mission happened to fly over the area where Indianapolis had gone down. The pilot, Wilbur Gwynn, spotted an oil slick on the water below. Then he saw the men. He was not supposed to land. His aircraft was not a rescue plane. The standing orders were clear: report the sighting and wait for proper rescue ships. Lieutenant Adrian Marks, flying a different aircraft nearby, received Gwynn's report and flew to the scene. What he saw changed his mind about the standing orders. He counted the men in the water. He saw what was happening to them. He landed his aircraft on the open ocean, against regulations, in conditions that could easily have destroyed the plane. He began pulling survivors onto the wings, lashing them in place with parachute cord when there was no more room inside. His aircraft eventually held 56 men, far more than it was ever designed to carry. It was the 2nd of August. Indianapolis had gone down on the 30th of July. The men had been in the water for 4 days. Of the 1,196 men aboard Indianapolis when she was torpedoed, 316 survived. 880 were gone. It was the greatest loss of life from a single ship in the history of the United States Navy. And it had happened not because of overwhelming enemy force, but because of paperwork, poor communication, and a chain of small failures that nobody had bothered to question. The Navy had known, or should have known, that a ship carrying the most important cargo of the war was sailing alone through open water with no escort. They had the distress signals. They had the scheduled arrival that was never met. At every point where someone might have acted, the system had failed. The men who died in those 4 days deserved better than that. The Navy's response was not what the survivors expected. Rather than acknowledge the failures of the system, the Navy put Captain McVeigh on trial. He was court-martialed for failing to zigzag his ship, a maneuver that the Japanese submarine commander himself testified would not have made a difference. McVeigh was the only American naval captain in the entire war to be court-martialed for losing his ship in combat. He received hate mail for the rest of his life from people who blamed him for the deaths of their sons and brothers. In 1968, he took his own life in his garden, holding a toy sailor in his hand. It was not until the year 2000 that the United States Congress passed a resolution formally stating that McVeigh was not to blame for the sinking. A 12-year-old schoolboy named Hunter Scott, who had seen the Indianapolis story mentioned in the film Jaws, had campaigned for years to clear the captain's name. It took a child to do what the Navy would not. For 72 years, nobody knew exactly where Indianapolis rested. She was found in 2017 by a research team funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, lying 18,000 feet below the surface of the Philippine Sea. Her hull number, CA-35, was still visible on her bow. The wreck was found 2 weeks before the 72nd anniversary of her sinking. Many of the men who survived were still alive. Some of them learned about the discovery on the news like everyone else. They had spent their whole lives carrying what happened in those 4 days. The shark attacks, the men who disappeared in the dark, the thirst and the sun and the waiting, the guilt of being one of the ones who made it. The Indianapolis completed her mission. She delivered the weapon that ended the war. And then the Navy lost track of her for 4 days while her crew died in the water and spent decades afterward blaming the wrong man for it. She deserved better. Her crew deserved better. And the least that can be said about them now, all these years later, is that what they survived in those 4 days was something no human being should ever be asked to endure.